There are less than 2% Black women in STEM, and then if you break that down to science specifically, for just the S in STEM, you're looking at a number that's a lot lower. Innovation requires us to have diversity in thought, diversity in leadership, and the problems that we're looking to solve, which are very diverse, is going to depend on that diverse workforce. We won't be able to address all of these problems that exist for different demographics that could impact the world for everyone if we don't increase the diversity within the workforce. We need more biotech startups that are solving some of these really important questions that'll impact the world, that are going to be able to feed our growing population or to address some of these pathologies that exist in plants and farms and other industries and therapeutics, making sure that folks are workforce ready, especially because academia does a great job of training academics, but I think there's a gap in learning for a lot of students going into industry where they don't really know what they need to do. I think folks who are interested in taking non-traditional paths in science, that it's more innovative and impact focused, should definitely listen as we talk about this other sector that's not spoken about a lot, which is biotech startups. Just understanding the value of working in startup, what you can gain as a scientist working in startup, and also pathways to get into those startups. So we partner with academic institutions, with community organizations here in the Bay Area, and also with different biotech and biopharma companies. So we get a lot of students from universities around the country, and then if their university doesn't have an affiliation with Melanin Science, can go on our website and subscribe to our newsletter, check out our events for things that are upcoming.
Welcome to the Science with Impact podcast. Here we emphasize stories of scientists and other professionals who help broaden STEM research's societal impact. And today we have Dr. Carmen Banks with us. Carmen, could you please introduce yourself?
Thanks so much for having me, Vanessa. Yeah, my name is Dr. Carmen Banks. I'm a cell and molecular biologist by training. I built most of my career in science at early stage biotech startups ranging from food tech to ag tech and pharma. And in addition to my role as a scientist, I'm also founder and CEO of Melanin Science, which is a workforce development company creating pathways for underrepresented students and early career professionals into biotech and biopharma careers. I founded Melanin Science officially about 2 years ago. And in the 2 years that we've been operating, we've grown our community. Now that number keeps growing to over 1,000 students and early career professionals that we've been so fortunate to serve through our programming. So I'm really excited about that.
How did you get to know me and Science with Impact?
I actually got to know you through Paul Ferombi, so shout out to Paul. I saw his podcast episode on your podcast and was really excited about the work you do, the voices that you're amplifying, and had to reach out to see if there was any synergy between what I do and what you do.
So great. I'm really glad that you did reach out. Could you tell us a story about some of the impactful moments that led to you becoming a scientist?
Yeah, so actually when I was an undergrad, I thought I wanted to go to vet school. I was on this pre-vet journey thinking that I was going to be a veterinarian, more specifically with reptiles, because I really love reptiles. And in an attempt to build up my resume, I started working in a poultry nutrition lab and very quickly realized I hated working with chickens and vet school was not for me, but I wasn't sure what I could do with this life science degree that wasn't going to vet school, being a vet tech, or maybe going into academia. One of my friends had encouraged me to apply for other labs. And during undergrad, I ended up getting a position in a molecular diagnostics lab at the USDA. At that time, it was a plant lab, so it felt like it had nothing to do with my degree, nothing to do with the trajectory that I wanted to be on. But that experience actually opened the doors for me to want to become a scientist. I realized I loved molecular biology, I loved the independence of working in the lab, and I loved the curiosity aspect of being a scientist and being able to ask and answer these really cool and important questions that are impacting the world around us. And so that experience, again, while it seemed it was so unrelated to my professional and academic journey, was really what led me to become a bench scientist that I am today.
I feel like I've never met a scientist who has a direct path. of I knew I wanted to be a scientist, exactly what kind of scientist, and then I just did it. Like, never heard that.
Even still, as I'm working, I have worked in all different fields. Again, I started doing cultivated meat in food tech, and then the startup I was working for pivoted to pharma. So I very quickly had to become an expert in antibody development and discovery. And now I work in the ag tech space, back full circle moment in plant pathology. So it's been a really cool journey, and I've loved all of the different experiences, because one of the things that I've learned, starting from that one experience at the USDA all the way into startups that I'm working in now, is that although the host species might be different, a lot of the techniques and the thinking is the same. And so I've been able to apply some of the things that I've learned in each discipline to a new field of science and innovate in a really cool, pivotal way.
I feel like I have to ask a question that anybody listening might have. Why reptiles?
I don't know. When I was younger, I just loved snakes. I even have a pet snake. His name is Jackson, named after Samuel L. Jackson from Snakes on a Plane, if anyone's ever seen it.
Of course.
I've just loved reptiles, and I think somewhere down the line in my scientific career, I'd love to pursue something that's like snake venom as a therapeutic or something along those lines. But I just loved reptiles for as long as I've known. Here he is, the ball python. My Halloween nails match the vibe too.
He's gorgeous.
Yeah, he's what they call a bumblebee morph. So he is and black. He's about 7 years old.
Wow. Have you had him all those 7 years?
Yeah, I got him when he was a little baby snake when I was in grad school.
That's incredible. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for showing us Jackson. That's so cool.
I felt fortunate because I still love animals, and I was able to harness on that love for animals without going to vet school. So my PhD is actually in animal biology. And during my PhD, we used pigs as a model. So I was always at the pig barn working with the sweet little baby piglets and the mama pigs, also working with some dairy cows. And as a teaching assistant, we taught a lot of animal science classes, so goats, sheep, a lot of domestic animals. So it's been really fun and cool to be able to pursue my passion of animals, but in a scientific way.
Science with Impact is dedicated to helping scientists broaden their societal impacts. We have a newsletter, and the newsletter is filled with stories, examples, and resources for how to and how people have broadened their societal impacts in STEM. So there's no cost, and we would just love it if you'd be willing to subscribe. What are some specific ways that graduate scientists can get involved in the startup ecosystem to have a greater real world impact beyond just patents and publications?
I think one of the first things, the biggest things that grad students can do is get acquainted with what startups look like, what startups are in your area, and if startups are a good fit for you. So I have built my career across various early stage startups, and I tend to like these early stage startups because your impact is very visible. You're often reporting directly to your senior leadership team, whether that be your CTO, your CEO, etc. And the science that you're performing and the decisions that you make are directly impacting the decisions as a business as a whole on a daily basis. But I do recognize that every single startup that you join will not operate the same. So early stage startups will operate a little bit more chaotically, but beautifully chaotic than a mid-stage or a larger stage startup. So if you recognize that you're a person that needs a little bit more structure, but you don't necessarily want to go into an enterprise level company, then a later stage startup might be for you. And it would be really beneficial to talk to folks who have worked at different levels of startups. If you're someone who is able to embrace the beautiful chaos of an early stage startup, if you like wearing multiple hats, if you want to get more exposure to the business functions and some of the non-technical aspects of science, then an early stage startup might be great for you. I just really encourage folks to talk to folks who have worked in startups. It's a very unique work environment, and also to check out some startups that align with your passions and align with your interests. There are many different startups doing incredible things throughout science, and I think there's an opportunity for folks to find something that really aligns with what they're passionate about in science.
How did you balance interacting with a startup and grad school?
I actually got recruited to my first startup out of grad school. So I didn't necessarily have to balance the work and school at the same time. I recognized very early that I wanted an impactful career in science, but I didn't love all of the red tape and boundaries that would come with larger companies. And my first startup was Series C, so they're mid-size. It was about 150 to 200 employees when I joined. I just kind of embraced it and I asked a ton of questions. I think the beautiful thing about working in those environments is folks are constantly learning, and that learning and adaptability mindset is valued. And there is no wrong answer. And it's also a place where you can take some of those scientific risks that you might not be able to take in other types of work environments. So I really honed in on that. I tried to establish really good work mentors, good relationships with folks in cross-functional teams to learn other aspects of the business other than, at that time I was doing cell line development and genome engineering, so I wanted to learn a little bit more about what they do on the cell culture side or the tissue engineering side to really broaden my skill set and my scope of work as a scientist.
It's so clear that you gravitated toward industry as a student early on. Can you walk me through what you were thinking about that and how that connected with your impact?
In full transparency, when I started my PhD, I knew I did not want to be a professor. I took a year off between my undergrad and grad school, and I went straight to a PhD. I didn't do a master's. And very quickly, when I started grad school, I learned that academia was not a track I wanted to go on. I really respect folks that are in academia because it takes a lot of heart, it takes a lot of rigor, it takes a lot of resilience. But I wanted to do something where the impact was a bit quicker. I also did not want to be so focused on writing grants and chasing money for my scientific impact. And so I let my PI at that time know what my career goals were, and he was great in positioning my PhD project to one that would give me skills that would be desirable for industry. So I think for folks who are just starting grad school and unsure what track they want to go on, whether it's pharma or academia, postdocs, or startup, really talk to your advisor and let them know what you're thinking, because a lot of those skills that you will build in grad school will be the ones that your employers are looking for to make you a more marketable candidate.
When you were navigating that discussion with your PI about, really want to be industry focused and not necessarily academic focused, what skill sets did the two of you set out to develop in yourself?
As someone who is in an animal science, animal biology degree, there are two tracks. If you want to go on the academic track of animal science, animal biology, what academia values is doing more animal trials. For instance, we had a trial with using pigs as a model to increase lactation. As a professor, you'll be doing a lot of those animal trials for your research. In industry, it's a bit more of those cell culture models. And what my PI did was he positioned my project to be more focused on cell and molecular biology. So I was studying the transcriptional regulation of the prolactin receptor during pregnancy and lactation. And what that positioned me to do is to have skills that not only were applicable for animal biology and animal science, but could also be applicable for pharma or cell and gene therapy or ag tech, which I'm in now, and diagnostics and assay development.
So as you were building those skill sets focused more towards cell culturing, can you explain why does the industry related to animal science focus on cell culturing versus animal trials?
It really depends on what the goal of the research is. And I can speak specifically to startups. So startups move very fast, oftentimes can be cash strapped because we are constantly raising funding from different sources, whether it's venture capital, non-dilutive grants, etc. Animal trials take a very long time. So to give you some context, for us to look at milk yield for our pigs, their gestation or their pregnancy length is 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days. And so every single time we need to get some biological replicates, that's over 3 months of time that we have to wait until the next pig will farrow or give birth. And so that's just really time consuming. And when you're working in a more fast-paced environment, you need something that can represent human models, but may not take that large amount of time. And so folks might focus more on these cell culture models or murine models, mice, rats, etc., that have shorter lengths of their pregnancy and, in my case, lactation.
Would you say that academia, in your experience, kind of favors rigor, whereas industry favors results?
Startup definitely values rigor and results because it moves very fast. A lot faster than you would experience at an enterprise level company and a lot faster than you would experience at academia. So we're always pushed to think innovatively. If something isn't working, we embody this mindset of fail fast and move on. Whereas in academia, you might spend months trying to troubleshoot something that didn't work. We don't necessarily care why it didn't work, we just need it to work. So you better figure out some other method to make it work or an alternative path to that. But I think in academia, you just have the luxury of having a bit more time because you don't have investors who are looking for their return in X amount of years or X amount of months, and you don't have the livelihood of your company reliant on these results. There is definitely a degree of rigor that exists in academia and industry and in startup. It looks a little bit different.
As graduate students go from completing and defending their degrees to possibly looking at a career in industry with startups, can you give us a few kind of like green flags of startups that are good to participate in fresh out of grad school versus red flags?
I think it's really important for students to remember when you go in these interviews, the companies not only are interviewing you, but you are interviewing them because you want to make sure that you're in an environment that's going to foster your growth, your mobility, and your trajectory as a scientist. One of the things that I always ask when I'm interviewing for a startup is the runway, so the amount of capital or money that they have left. If a company only has 1 year of money left, then your job stability will be very questionable. Whereas if they have 2 to 5 years of runway left, then you can bank on having a little bit more stability in your job. Another thing I like to ask are very technical questions as it relates to their scientific goals to kind of field how realistic the goals are compared to what the company is hoping to achieve. So if you have, let's say, a background in just throwing something out there, transcriptional regulation of a particular receptor, and you, from your experience, know that to figure out whatever experimental question you had could take up to 2 years, and this startup is communicating that they're going to find the answer to this question in 3 months, that could be a red flag because they might not be realistic with the science and the expectations. I think it depends on the questions that you ask, but I have learned that I value startups that are run by scientists versus business folks because startups that are founded and run by scientists tend to be more realistic about the timelines with respect to the science, and they tend to understand how long things can take. They tend to understand that biology sometimes it just doesn't work and we don't know why it doesn't work. You want to prioritize having a manager or some sort of people HR system that fosters the growth of early talent, or even if you're later in your career, fosters your growth as a professional to whatever level you want to be at, and having those conversations very early.
Could you unpack for anybody who doesn't know what runway means? I'm sure we can all have an intuitive sense of like how long you can go before everything goes bankrupt, but can you give us a more like detailed breakdown of what one runway means and how people measure that?
So the amount of runway is essentially the amount of capital or the amount of money that a company has before they run out, so they can't operate any longer. And when you're looking at startups, there will be different series. So you have your pre-seed or your seed, your series A, which will be lower in funding, a lot smaller size company. Series B, which tends to be like a B and C tend to be more mid-stage startups, and then beyond C is closer to going public or IPO, etc. So your pre-seed and your seed companies are going to have a lot less runway. So those companies are ones that are still developing the science. They have a really innovative idea and they're still in the proof of concept stage. The amount of funding that goes to those companies can vary, but it tends to be a lot lower than a company who has gone through multiple rounds of funding that might have a couple $100 million in the bank or 50 million or 20 million, whatever that number might be.
Have you had experience, is it right to say seeding funding for these companies before?
I haven't from a biotech lens. I've been exposed to the process from working at early stage biotech companies And now for Melanin Science, we're gearing up to fundraise. So I'm lucky to have a really great advisory board member and mentor who used to be the CEO of my last biotech company, guiding me through that process and what that looks like. So I will have more direct experience for you in the next couple months.
What's one thing that you're learning is really important for preparing for raising capital?
Communication and being able to communicate my message to broad audiences. I think as scientists, we tend to be very granular and we tend to give a lot of detail. And I think that is valued in academic spaces where we want to be more thorough in the science. But for folks who are sitting on the senior leadership team who might not have as much time, they are mainly concerned with what are the results, what are the impact, and why should I care? And I've learned to really tailor my communication more around impact than the amount of work that was done, if that makes sense. So we don't really need to see that I did a Western blot, a qPCR, and ran a gel to show the same thing. We just need to know what were the results from the experiment and then what is my plan to move forward or to move the project forward. And I've adapted that same mindset with Melanin Science, although it's not a technical company. Folks just really are interested in what is my broader vision? How will this create a return on an investment if folks are investing in it, and why should people care? And so that's one thing that I've adapted and have learned, that communication and that storytelling is really key across technical and non-technical roles.
How would you answer those questions if some or like an investor were to ask them right now?
My broader vision is I really want to create this circular economy for underrepresented folks in science. What we're focused on now is the workforce development piece. And as I've progressed through my own scientific and academic journey, I realized that I was not the only person who had this life science degree that had no idea what they could do with it, especially with grad students. There's a lot of students who don't want to go into academia, but biotech and biopharma tends to be this black box that no one knows how to get into. I founded Melanin Science to serve folks like myself who want these really lucrative careers in biotech and biopharma, but don't necessarily know how to get there. And then why this is important, especially for underrepresented communities, and this is for my demographic specifically, there are less than 2% Black women in STEM. And then if you break that down to science specifically, for just the S in STEM, you're looking at a number that's a lot lower. And one of the things that I like to emphasize, especially working in startup, is innovation requires us to have diversity in thought, diversity in leadership, and the problems that we're looking to solve, which are very diverse, is going to depend on that diverse workforce. And so we won't be able to address all of these problems that exist for different demographics that could impact the world for everyone if we don't increase the diversity within the workforce.
How is this going to provide a return on capital?
For the hiring and talent acquisition process for a lot of these companies, it's very costly and turnover is very high. And so what we do through Melanin Science is train the workforce so they are ready for these companies, so they have the skills that they're already looking for, and through an internship model are allowing companies to have access to this pre-vetted, very talented, diverse pool of folks that are potential biotech, biopharma, workforce ready without spending thousands of dollars on talent acquisition, on recruiting and training just for that person to quit.
Why should people care?
Why students should care is we need to get you into the biotech workforce. We need more entrepreneurs. We need more biotech startups that are solving some of these really important questions that'll impact the world, that are going to be able to feed our growing population or to address some of these pathologies that exist in plants and farms and other industries and therapeutics. And so making sure that folks are workforce ready, especially because academia does a great job of training academics, but I think there's a gap in learning for a lot of students going into industry where they don't really know what they need to do. And so I found an increased interest in our academic partners for creating more biotech pathway programs so that the students can be innovators, they can develop the next drug for HIV or for breast cancer or whatever that might be.
The vision is that People in society would feel intimately connected with the advances in STEM research that they fund through their tax dollars. That would be the vision that you would see it in the magazines, in the news, on social media of what is the latest advancement in CERN and what did the Hubble telescope pick up and what are they doing in biotech and what are the different startups in these areas that the people would be talking about them as often as they talk about celebrities or dietary fads or catastrophic situations in our world.
I don't know if you've ever felt this way. I'm still a scientist at my core and I still work for a biotech company, but I've had this fear of moving away from science because I eventually want Melanin Science to be my full-time job and losing that scientific identity. And if someone asks me what I do, I automatically want to say I'm a scientist. But as I transition to doing all Melanin Science and workforce development and such, I still am a scientist. But I'm like, am I throwing my degree away? What did I spend all this time in industry doing? But as I've grown and continue to grow Melanin Science, I'm realizing that this type of thinking that you and I have, or like writing down ideas and thinking of how to innovate, and science communication has really helped me in the non-scientific parts of my life.
I struggle with that too, that identity shift that happens when you decide to move away from academia, just because it feels so embedded in our training that we will continue as professors. Totally a valid path, just not one that I saw being fruitful for me. I taught, I did research, I've been an administrator, all in academia. And I will say that for me, I feel like I've had the greatest impact through the company that I founded through my startup. Mostly just because I get to invent the structures and the systems embedded in how the company works. If you want to promote change in academia, you have to be very patient. The wheels of academia turn slower than the wheels of justice. It's a big ship, and to reroute a big ship takes a tremendous amount of effort. Whereas you and I are in our own little tiny pirate ships, and we can just shift as much as we want to. And I really think that's the heart of why these startups can be so impactful.
And honestly, being able to see your impact on a daily basis, that's what did it for me. It felt like in academia, I was studying something that no one really cared about, or a very small subset of people actually cared about. Wasn't really sure how it was going to impact the broader world. Sure, I understand it from like a high level, but I'm not actually seeing the impact. Whereas when I was working in startup, I could literally see this experiment led to X, like literally returns in our partnership. So we get paid for delivering on experiments, and like me improving the cell line meant that this cultivated meat company could produce X tons more of cultivated chicken or whatever their product was. So that has been really cool. And it fuels my fire for being a scientist.
I thought I was crazy in graduate school because I constantly thought about writing all these articles is cool, getting published is cool, getting citations is cool, my impact factor is cool. But like, what impact am I really making on society? And the disconnect between when I finished the experiment and when those impacts were apparent was like really large. If you're the kind of person who's having an existential crisis in graduate school over the impact that you're having or how it could be innovated or wanting to change systems, maybe startups are for you.
One of the things that is really disheartening, or at least for me when I was in grad school, is some of the failed experiments, because academia doesn't really value things that fail. They value things that work. You only are publishing the positive results, but there's actually a lot of growth and there's a lot of information in the experiments that don't work. And what I've enjoyed about working in industry over academia is I've gotten the flexibility and time to think about the things that didn't work and how we can either leverage that for a different project or what I could do differently to get the same outcome just with a different path.
How have you been able to pave your own path and be unapologetic about exploring beyond the traditional boundaries of academia?
I ask a lot of questions and I have learned to not be afraid of failure. I recognized when I was first starting my career and I was in academia, I was really afraid to fail. I was afraid if my experiments didn't work. I wanted to fit that traditional mold of what we deem as successful in academia. But then when I started working, I realized that success in science isn't just the amount of publications or it isn't the amount of patents. And quite frankly, if you're a grad student, like myself, who didn't have 5 publications at the end of your PhD, don't fret, because industry doesn't really care about how many papers you've published. So that was also really great for boosting my own confidence and making me realize that my worth is more than the publication. So I've just kind of embraced that. I've asked a ton of questions. And then what I was privileged to have the opportunity to do in startup is also explore some of these tangential projects. So if I was working on one particular project, I saw something interesting that might add value to the company, I was given the opportunity to explore that and to create my own lane within the company I was working in, and how impactful, innovative, and adaptable I was as a scientist. So that's kind of what I did.
So I work with two wonderful people on the Science with Impact team, and one of them is Yasmina Demai, and she's my science communicator extraordinaire. And she says one thing she notices about the difference between academia and industry is that academia's writing seems to be more focused on prestige, whereas industry writing seems to be way more focused on purpose. Like, how do we make this purposeful and meaningful and resonate with people? Whereas academia doesn't always seem to have that drive to resonate with the broader public.
Yes, I could not agree with that more.
What are some of the key barriers preventing more diversity and inclusion in STEM fields, and how can researchers actively work to address those challenges, especially what's going on in today's day and age?
I think one big barrier that I've seen, and this applies to all students, building on what we were talking about, is really this emphasis on value being the amount of publications that you have. And as I progress throughout grad school and I talk to grad students and work with grad students now, sometimes the amount of publications that you have is no fault of your own. Sometimes your science just doesn't work and you're doing really hard things and it's hard to get it done in 5 years, or your lab isn't as well funded as the lab next door to you, or your PI is a new PI and maybe they just don't have 20 Nature papers that have already been published and keep cranking those out every year. And so I think that can be discouraging and almost seen as a disadvantage for students coming out because of no fault of their own. They just happened to be in a lab that wasn't as high impact as another lab. And so I like to encourage students to explore opportunities outside of academia that do value your impact as a person and the quality of science that you're performing and your innovative mindset, rather than just the publications. Another gap that I see that's getting worse as funding is being cut to universities is the technical skills and exposure that students are going to need to become marketable candidates in the biotech workforce. A lot of these jobs, if you want a bench role, is going to expect you to know certain techniques or to be able to do certain things. And if you're an undergrad student and you just don't have the opportunity to work in a lab, then you're a lot further behind than the undergrad that might have worked in a lab or had an internship at a big enterprise level pharma company or something like that. So that's another area that I see. But I think one way that we can combat this at the academic level and in the industry level is giving students that might not have all 4 years of their undergrad experience working in a lab a chance, because those students are often very hungry to learn, to innovate, to figure it out. They have the adaptability mindset and they really just want to grow. And those students tend to be really great interns or really great undergrad researchers. So not just looking at where someone went to school, how many years they worked in the lab, but really looking at their potential as a person and some of those non-technical skills that they can bring to the table.
Bringing it back to purpose instead of prestige. If you're a mentor in STEM research and you're only mentoring people from prestigious universities who already have research programs, what is your impact? What is your purpose? And are you acting in alignment with that?
And that's what Melanin Science is trying to bridge that gap. So we're not just having companies only recruiting from these Ivy League schools that students of color are now not even getting the opportunity to go to because of a lot of the changes in our administration. So getting that diverse, highly skilled talent pipeline for folks to recruit from.
Can you tell us a story about how you've been able to shape the culture and direction of your biotech startup or of other biotech startups you've worked with?
So the first biotech startup that I worked for right out of grad school, they were just getting their DE&I, what did they call it? DE&I council. And I had done a lot of work for recruitment and retention of underrepresented students into the College of Ag during my PhD. So I was really excited to continue that work, part of why I founded Melanin Science. And so what I was able to do at that particular company was drive a lot of these DE&I initiatives and work with our senior leadership team to make sure that they were data-driven, that they were actionable, to identify some of the problems employees were facing as folks of color, or just doesn't even have to be about ethnic background, but maybe about gender, identity, etc. And then creating actionable plans to address those things from the top down. So I think a lot of companies will have DE&I initiatives that are driven from the bottom up, but then you reach these barriers if your senior leadership team isn't bought in. So it's really important to drive that change from the top down. Otherwise, it'll just be stagnant. So I was really excited and fortunate to be able to drive some of that at my first startup, and then carried that over to my second startup as well. Had a couple of interns, which was really fun, and mentoring, and just like building the junior scientists up.
Top down meets grassroots. I think that's such a great model to have overall. If the two can connect, now you're really doing it.
Yes, exactly.
Would you be willing to ask a question of our next guest? His name is Zach.
In a funding landscape where it is extremely hard for folks of color and women to fundraise, what can folks do to help diversify the landscape, and what advice would he give to folks of color or folks who historically have not had as much opportunity to get the same amount of funds to grow their business?
I think it was a wonderful conversation, really, about navigating industry versus academia and finding ways to amplify the message and the purpose of what you're doing.
Absolutely.